Hi Stats Girls, this is the video wrap-up for your ogive work, which is an extension of what we've been doing with histograms. So in class today, we left off talking about the European Union, and we had this table of values that included the population data for all 28 countries that are currently represented in the EU, or the European Union. So what we want to do here, you guys, is to set up a frequency table the exact same way that we've been doing so for all of our histogram work. So what you want to do is get started by finding the high and the low values in this table. So the lowest population that's reported for us is this 0.5 right down here. And then we want to look for the highest population. So it goes from Austria in this column and then down through the United Kingdom in this column. So it looks to me like the most populous country is Germany over here with 83 million people. So what we want to do to find our class width, and we're going to use 6 classes because that's what it tells us in the instructions, is to take our highest value, 83, subtract our smallest value, 0.5, and then divide that number by 6. So here, when you do that, 83 minus 0.5 is going to give you 82.5. Divide that number by 6, and you're going to get 13.75. So what we want to do here is to round that number up to the nearest integer whole value, and we'll be working with 14. So for our class intervals, in this case, I would recommend beginning this value at 0 instead of 0.5, just so we can count values completely in whole numbers as we're going through our class intervals. So we can make this 0 to 14. Then we'll increment up and do 15. And then 15 plus 14 will be 29. Increment up to 30 and go up 14, so that will be 44. Then we'll get 45, increment up to 59, and then we'll go from 60 to 74, and then our last interval will be 75 up through, when we add 14 there, we'll get to 89. So those are our 6 class intervals that we're going to work with. Now we need to find our tallies. And this always kind of takes me a while to hunt through my data points. But first up, we're looking for ones that have a population between 0 and 14 million. So that's actually going to be a lot of these. So we've got Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, and then Greece and Hungary and Ireland. And then Italy's not going to work, but Latvia will, Lithuania will, Luxembourg will, Malta will, Portugal. Then we've got 5 million in Slovakia, 2 million in Slovenia, and 10 in Sweden. So it looks like actually the majority of the countries are going to fit into this interval. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So 20 of our values here. And I didn't write those down as tallies. I can just write them in the frequency column then, and that's fine. So now I need to hunt for my 15 through 25 million population values. So in 15 through 29, it looks like we've got the Netherlands at 17 million, Romania at 20 million, and that looks like pretty much it there. So that's going to be 2 values. Then we would need 30 to 44. And it looks like we just might have one that fits that category. So Poland has 38 million. And so 38 is just going to be the one tally mark that we have there. Oops, wrong pencil there. Then we've got the range from 45 to 59. So 45 to 59, it looks like we may also just have one. So it looks like Spain has 47. And then that's it for that option. Then we've got the 60 to 74. So who fits into that category? 60 to 74. We've got France coming in with 67, Italy with 61, and the UK with 66. So it looks like we've got 3 of those. And then the only one in between 75 to 89 was our largest country, Germany. So there's one there. Then, like we've talked about before, you guys, it's a good idea to make sure that they add up to the value that you're looking for. So here, 20 plus 2 is 22, 23, 24, and then 27, 28. So the total is 28, which is how many countries we talked about before. So that's your frequency value. Then your relative frequency, remember, is just taking the number from your frequency column and dividing it by the total. So we would divide 20 by 28, and 2 by 28, 1 by 28, 1 by 28, 3 by 28, and 1 by 28. So go ahead and plug that into your calculator and see what you get out. And let's go ahead and round to 2 decimal places. So this is going to be 0.71. 2 out of 28 is going to give you 0.07. 1 out of 28 is going to be 0.035 or 0.04. So 0.04. And this guy down here will also be 0.04. And then 3 out of 28 is going to be 0.11. Now, how many decimal places you use here kind of depends on the convention, sort of what field you're working in. But you do want these values to add up to approximately 1. If you get something like 0.99 or 1.01, that's okay too. That's just a rounding error. So what we have next, these final 2 columns in our table, are what we really need for the new graph that we're talking about today, so the ogive. And these deal with cumulative frequency and cumulative proportions. So this process looks a little bit different from what we've done with histograms before. When it comes to the cumulative frequency, what you're going to do is to add up the values from each of the categories up to the interval where you're working. So when we begin our tally, we look at the range of values from 0 to 14. So first off, I consider how many values there are in that interval. So from 0 to 14, we start off with 20 countries that have a population in that range between 0 to 14 million. Then when we take a look at the next category, we're not just going to consider 15 to 29 million by itself. Instead, what we're going to do is consider all of the countries that have a range from 0 up to 29 million. So what that means is we're going to add the frequency from our first class and the frequency of our second class. So here, that's going to be 20 plus 2. So this value is going to be 22. So what I can say is there are 20 countries that have a value for population between 0 and 14, but then there are 22 that have a range between 0 and 29. Then I just keep going with that process. So then I'm going to add in the category of countries that have between 30 and 44. So that means I'm going to add these 3 values together. 20 plus 2 plus 1. So that's going to be 23. So 23 countries with 0 to 44 million. I keep going. So now I look at 45 to 59. There's one more country there. So I add 20 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1, and I'm going to get 24 here. Then I go to the 60 to 74 range, and I'm going to add the 3. And so you can either continue to add just straight down this column, or I can just see that this 3 will be added to the 24, and my next value will be 27. And then I include the last interval range, and that's going to add 1 more to my total. So I'll have 28 total at the bottom. So your cumulative frequency is adding the frequencies of each interval together. So that way you can talk about a broader range of values and the percentages or the numerical quantities that go along with them. So then your cumulative proportions here, again, you're just going to divide each of these cumulative frequencies by the total. So in this case, 28. So I'll have 20 over 28, 22 over 28, 23 over 28, 24 out of 28, 27 out of 28, and then 28 out of 28. So we want to go ahead and find those values when you divide in your calculator. So when I divide 20 by 28, same thing as what we had before, so 0.71. Then I want to do 22 by 28, and we'll end up with 0.79. 23 by 28 gives me 0.82. 24 by 28, we get 0.86. 27 by 28, we get 0.96. And then, of course, for 28 over 28, we'll get 1. So you can think of these as proportions, so decimal values, or you can think of them as percentages. So this would be 71%, 79%, 82%, 86%, and so on. So when we go to graph a histogram, we look at the class intervals, and then we graph the frequency or the relative frequency. When it comes to an ogive, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our lower bounds, so these values here. So you can look at your lower bounds, or there are some operations where you're going to want to use your upper bounds. So go ahead and take a look at both of these values here. We won't include the entire interval, though. We're either going to work with the lower or the upper. And then the other thing that we want to take a look at are these cumulative proportion values, so these percentages. So what I want to have you do on the next slide or the next page is to go ahead and graph these values, so your upper limits. So I'm going to write UL for upper limits, and then your proportions here. So you want to put these guys on your x-axis, and you want to put these guys on your y-axis. So you've got space on the next page to go ahead and do that. So our upper values begin at 14, and then we go to 29 and 44. So let's go ahead and give ourselves kind of an approximate marking for that. So 14, then 29, then 44, then 59, then we've got 74 and 89. So 74 is here, 89 is here. And so what this represents is the population of EU countries, and we're measuring in millions. Then what we're going to do is to have our y-axis match up to these percentages. So notice we're starting at a pretty high percentage. We're starting at 71%. So let's go ahead and kind of give ourselves a squiggle line to indicate that we're starting at a higher value than normal. And then let's call this guy 0.71. And then we need to go up to about the full 1 value. So then let's just kind of scale here. So we need 0.79, so maybe about here. And then 0.82 is going to be a little bit closer there. We've got 0.86 and 0.96. So 0.86 is going to be pretty close here. And then 0.96 is going to be a little bit farther up there. It doesn't have to be perfect scaling, but just so it appears that the approximate distance between each of the values is correct. And then this is what we call our cumulative frequency. And we can express that in proportions or in percentages. They're equivalent, so it doesn't really matter. Now, with our values, we had 14. That percentage value was 71% or 0.71. 29 was 0.79. 44 was 0.82. 59 was 0.86. 74 was 0.96, so up here. And then 89 was 1. So our ogive looked something like this. So an ogive is a really useful graph because it allows you to draw conclusions about multiple categories at one time that you would have in a frequency table. So when you read off an ogive, you essentially read below percentage values. And we'll talk more about what that means when we do another example of an ogive on Monday. But what I can say is this value of 14 is the upper bound of my first class. So the corresponding y value, this 0.71 or 71%, tells me that 71% of the countries in the EU have a population below 71%, or below 14 million. So when it says draw two below conclusions, the first conclusion we can draw is 71% of EU countries have a population below 14 million. Just trying to get that down quickly. And you can do that with any data point. So for instance, if I look at 59, the corresponding output value there was 0.86. So I can say something like 86% of EU countries have a population below, in this case, 59 million, because that's what I looked at for my X value. So when I look at the Y data points, I'm saying below this value. I can also reverse the process, so I can draw above conclusions, so information about percentages above a specific value. So for example, if 71% are below 14 million, what that has to mean is 100 minus 71 is 29%. So 29% of EU countries, instead of having a population below 14 million, have a population above 14 million. And so you can do that with any data point here.